No, welcome to the shipper update here. I'm here with Anthony Smith, and I'm Zach Strickland. Anthony, chief economist, what do we got today on this Tuesday?
So it's Tuesday, and this week has a good amount of releases. I mean, last week was a little bit heavy on the latter side, but this week we have CPI, so we're going to talk about that in a few moments here. We have the PPI, retail sales, industrial production, and a few others that are going to get released this week. So going into our first one, we have the CPI, which just got updated this morning, showing, surprise, an increase.
What?
Yeah, who would have thunk? And so the other big thing is that this is throughout the month of March, so it's going to be a little bit lagged, but we're just looking back to see what the impacts were throughout the month.
Sure.
When we're looking at this chart here, we have in the orange line a regression line back to 2018, just to kind of show where the average line was and how we're really starting to vary above it. Yeah. And so when we look at the most recent month of release here for March, we saw that there was a 0.3% monthly increase, 8.5% year over year. Now this is an upward movement from the 7.9% increase year over year in the previous month. And so the thing that's interesting is that this is kind of like a bit of a sigh of relief that it wasn't even worse, that it didn't hit double digits.
Now this includes all the items, right? This is gas and food, right?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that. So going into our next chart here, we have CPI for gasoline. As you can see, it has a different pattern altogether. And so when we saw energy overall within the report, we saw that there was increase for energy for 32% and gasoline of all types 48% on a 12-month unadjusted basis. And so that is just showing the amount of upward movement that there was over this last month. We're looking at gasoline just for the month of March. It's going to be around an 18% increase. And so we're just seeing that double-digit growth is there. And it's definitely concerning when we're looking at these movements here. I pulled up this one. I'm going to do a quick comparison, not just because it has CPI of gasoline, but this is CPI of gasoline with PPI. And that just shows how quick those producers are going to be passing forward those price increases. This isn't going to be like some of those businesses are like, no, we got to take a little bit of those hits so we can maintain some market share. No, this is going to get passed straight to the consumer. So when you're seeing those price increases, that's because those producers are getting those increased prices as well.
Yeah, this is fascinating to me because when we're talking about fuel and gas and energy prices and costs, it looks like almost they're passed along almost immediately. Yeah. While as some of the underlying fundamental costs of production, materials, commodities, that are maybe outside of that realm, kind of get a little bit of a buffer before they get passed along, right?
That's exactly right. And so I think when we're looking at the current economic environment, it's going to be an interesting, I think, scenario that we're kind of walking into, because typically, we're talking about just now passing along those price increases to those consumers. Those producers can do it, those shippers can do it in times where economic growth is plentiful. The consumers can take on those hits. The consumers can take the hits, kind of, but really the discretionary spending is going to get a lot more, directed at, am I going to spend on goods? Am I going to spend on services? Am I going to spend on maybe repairing or replacing something that I have instead of buying something new? And so there's going to be all these other thoughts that go into it. And so really when we're looking at those prices for shippers out there, you really have to take into consideration they're already getting eaten up by inflation for these essential goods and somewhat essential goods. Maybe if you don't drive anywhere, you just walk everywhere like myself, maybe that's not as essential. But I mean, you're looking at all these price increases really across the board. And that's really going to have to really make you take into consideration, am I going to be able to spend on more durable goods here? Am I going to be able to spend on services? Maybe go on a vacation. Maybe I'm going off to Florida, riding into the sunset, instead of, buying a new big screen TV. I want to go there. And so there's going to be a lot more forethought into all this stuff as we're starting to see this inflationary pressures really continue to pick up.
Now, I mean, we talked about inflation well before it was even a factor. Mm-hmm. Like, what do you think was like the big point of inflection? Because we've obviously crossed it in the freight market.
Yeah.
At the beginning of March, it was almost like faucet turned off.
Right.
What was the big thing for the inflationary pressure to start really taking off?
So I think there was a few factors here. I think when we're looking at, of course, the net worth of households went up, but a lot of that's going to be tied to their ownership of a house, increasing some of their net worth as well. I think when you're looking at the amount of unemployment benefits that were going out, the stimulus packages and things like that, before when we saw these, these rapid increases in inflation, when asked like, do I think consumers are going to spend on goods or services, my thought was, both. They can.
Right.
They don't have to choose. I mean, if there's a service or a concert open, they're going to take part in that. But now, I mean, it's gotten to a point, especially with these gas prices over the last month, that really was picking up in February. I mean, it really started, I think, to deplete some consumers. And now you even saw in the latest consumer credit card data that even started to pick up at a pretty rapid clip as well.
Yeah, gas getting put onto that revolving credit now. Man, always an interesting spot. Thank you so much for that, Anthony Smith. We'll toss it back over to Mike and Kaylee.